this idea of what the church is. And who we are as a body of believers, as a community at Bay Area, and as a community of believers across the world. And so we started with we are united. Right, that's where Jesus prays for us. That's where Jesus kind of begins his message and his prayer for us as followers of Jesus, that as we are united together, even in the midst of all of our differences, differing opinions, differing views on things, we can be united. And actually, when we are united in the midst of all of those things, it actually spreads the message of Jesus on a deeper level and a more complete level than if we were disunified and we were not seeking unity. And we're saying Jesus loves you and wants you to be unified, and we're not, right? And so unity is something we have to seek. It's not something that just randomly happens. It's something we have to fight for and work for. Then we talked about being gospel-centered, that we never, ever move away from the gospel, right? We don't just understand and believe the good news about Jesus and then we're on our own from then on. Like, the gospel transforms every little part of our lives. And so not only does it transform us, it goes out from us, and it begins to transform the world around us, which is our third one. That we are mission focused. We understand that because God has given us the gospel to understand and believe and receive and respond to, that there is a mission that we have to the world around us. And we talked about all the ministries and all the nonprofits and all the missionaries. Sorry, that says vision focused? Mission focused. All right, it's a typo, my bad. All right, so we are mission focused, right? That we are living out the mission of God to the world. All right, yeah, we'll get there. All right, so the mission of God to the world. And so what we ultimately do is we start ministries or we join ministries and we find needs within our community and within our world, and we send out missionaries and we give diapers to organizations that need foster care families. Like we have all of these different ministries because the mission of God goes out from us when we understand and believe in the gospel. And then the next week we talked about being transformational. That we are people who are constantly going through transformation. No matter if you're the youngest child in here or the oldest silver-haired person in the room, transformation is and can continue to happen in your life. And as you are transformed, you have the ability to show others that they can be transformed too. And a church that is the church is being consistently and constantly transformed by the gospel and by the mission of God and by the working of the people to be united. And so lastly, we are generational. Right? And it's awesome that this worked out because it's Family Sunday and all the kids are in here. And I'm going to talk to some of the older people in the congregation, some of the youngish people in the congregation, right? Some of the young people in the congregation, because we are a church that is generational. You know, sometimes I am sitting around or I'm driving somewhere and I start getting these thoughts. Like, what do you think Bay Area is going to look like 10 years from now? 25 years from now? 50 years from now? 100 years from now? Right? Do you think about like the little ones that are sitting amongst us when they're the gray-haired ones? What does our church look like then? Right? I start thinking about like what it's going to look like for us. And I don't have these crazy ideas of like being a mega church out here with like lasers everywhere and smoke and like VR church. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the passion and the desire to follow Jesus being lived out in the church. And I want to know what that's going to look like years down the road. I want to see these young kids who are sitting in the room listening right now being worship leaders up here and being pastors and being teachers and giving communion medication and leading ministries. I want to think about what that's like. And it's really neat to really think about what that looks like. But the more I think about it, the more I process it, if I really let it, it kind of throws me into a full-blown panic attack. Because then I start asking the question, are we doing the things as a church that we need to do to prepare them to lead the church in the future? Am I doing the things as a father to prepare my kids to be the leaders that will lead the church 10, 15, 20 years from now? Are we doing the things as a church to disciple them into the followers of Jesus that they need to be, that they can become the leaders? Are we developing them into leaders, church leaders? Are we multiplying ministries so we can plug them into places? And I start getting really nervous and I have to just pause and say, you know what, God? I know you've got this. And so are we a church that's solely focused on what God is doing right now in the exact moment we're existing in, or are we a church that's thinking about the generations that will come after this? And my question is can we be both? Can we be a generational church that's focused on the people that are here in the present, but also fixed our eyes on what the future holds in our ministries? You see, the Bible has a lot to say about generations. In the Bible, a generation generally referred to about 40 years' time that was from the birth of a person until they had their first son. We don't have to get into all the reasons why first son happens, but that's just kind of how they viewed it. Okay? And that 40 years was kind of a cycle that happened over and over and over again throughout the Bible. You have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You have all of these family lines and lineages that we see in the Bible over and over again. And you can trace God's covenant and God's faithfulness through these families and through these generations. Right? You think about Moses and the Israelites. Right, they make it to the promised land, remember? And Joshua and Caleb and the other 10 who I don't think are named because they weren't good, right? I don't know if they're named or not. Right, but the other 10 go in and they're like, they're too big, we can't do it, right? And so what does God do? He punishes an entire generation of people and says, until your generation passes away, until that happens, right, you will not enter the promised land. All right, sorry, I apologize. We got a new computer this week to run this, and we're having some issues. I apologize. Of course, it worked great this week when we were testing it, but it's Sunday, right? So we'll get it working. It'll be fine. You can take notes. But, the promise of generations is significant, right? Because God cares not just about the immediate people, but God's thinking about the children of those people and the children of the children of the children of the children. In 1 Chronicles 16:8, David says this, so Psalm 105:8 and 1 Chronicles, right, it's the same poem, if you follow that, right? And it's the same thing. He says this, he remembers his covenant forever to the word that he commanded. It says, for 1,000 generations, right? God's thinking about 1,000 generations ahead. That's a lot of generations. Right? And so God is processing and thinking through the generations. And then in other places of the Bible, he specifically talks about the third and the fourth generation. And the reason for that is, generally speaking, you can have 4 generations existing at one time. Like time of life, lifespan, that kind of thing in general, especially back then where they lived a little bit longer, right? You had 4 generations existing at one time. And so God was saying, the judgment that I'm pronouncing upon you is for 3 to 4 generations, but also the grace is for 1,000. I love that, right? God, you're mean for 3 or 4 generations, right? But then the promise is 1,000 after that, right? And it says this in Deuteronomy 7:9, know therefore that the Lord your God is God, faithful, who keeps covenants and steadfast love to those to those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. You get into Judges, right? And as a former youth and children's minister, right, who just spent 2 weekends at camp with kids, who thinks a lot about the coming generations, one of the scariest verses in the Bible comes in Judges chapter 2. Because think about this, Judges chapter 2, the Israelites had made it into the promised land. Joshua had helped them conquer as much as they could, but then they got scared and they didn't complete the job, and all that happens, right? And so Joshua dies, and then this line is in here. Are you ready? It says, Judges 2:10, it says, and all that generation were also gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, who did not know the Lord and the work that he had done for Israel. It took 1 generation. I mean, think about this. They're 2 generations removed from being rescued from slavery from the mighty Egyptian empire. They're 2 generations removed from watching their firstborns being saved with the blood on the doorpost. They're 2 generations from crossing the Red Sea and the entire army of Egypt being destroyed in the process. They're 2 generations removed from manna and quail in the desert and water from rocks. 2 generations, and they've forgotten the good things that God had done for them. They're 1 generation removed from walking on bare ground through the Jordan River and conquering, watching the walls of Jericho fall down. And there arose after them a generation who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. It's scary to think how quickly we can forget the goodness of God. And so if we're going to be a church that is generational, We have to make sure that we are imparting and giving and leading our children to know God and the good things that he has done, and the good things that he is doing, and the good things that he will continue to do over and over again. So if we are united, and we are gospel-centered, and we are mission-focused, and we are transformational, and we are lastly generational, what does that mean for us? First, we value the generations that have gone before us. We think about, we listen to, we value the great Christian thinkers and servants and missionaries, who died long ago. We think about, we read them, we read what they're doing. We value their perspective on the world. We value and use the way that they saw the world to help us understand the world that we live in. We think about the spiritual giants that have existed in this church. Those who have gone before us, who have built up the church to where it is right now so that we have an opportunity to be here together. And we value the time and the talents and the treasures that they gave to our church so we have an opportunity to impart that same faith to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. We have to value the people that have gone before us. And we know that not everyone in human history that has served the church is perfect. Right? And we value our family members and those that have been before us that have helped us in our faith. And we know that they're not perfect, but they tried to faithfully follow Jesus and serve in the church. And where we are today is a product of their faithfulness. And that's a value for us. And so what does that look like for us? Well, we value their commitment. We honor them, we bless them, and we think about them. We think about the hard work that they did to create systems within our church and documents of our values and our vision and the things we hold true, and we think about them and we process them and we work through them, right? We follow their wisdom, we follow their instruction. And we understand that in what they did, they developed leaders, they made disciples, they multiplied ministries so we could be where we are today. And so we continually value those that have gone before us. Secondly, we value all present and future generations. Right, I often hear, you hear a lot, I love seeing the kids up there. They're the future of the church. No, they're in the church now. Like they're here, we can see them, right? They're with us. And many of our youth kids are over there teaching your kids or your grandkids about the faith. They're already imparting the faith onto the next generation. Maybe it's not a full generation, but it's another group that's below them. They're serving in ministries. They're serving in kids ministry and other areas within our church. They're actively engaged in their schools and their communities and their teams and their practices and everything that they go on because they value their faith and they make it part of what they do. We also value parents and those who are in that kind of middle age area where we value what they're doing with their families. And we come alongside them as a church and we value them. We value the maybe grayer haired people in the community. Right? And I can say that because I have a lot as well. Right? We value all generations because all generations provide unique perspective and value to our church. And we don't throw everyone into leadership positions whenever we want simply because of age or not age, but we value people. And if we're going to value this next generation, I want to call out something that I find very toxic within the church. And it's something I hear often. It's something that it really bothers me. And so I've read statistics. I know what the statistics say about kids who graduate from high school from the church. But it really bothers me when there's an expectation of church people that kids graduate from high school and leave the faith until they have kids again. Let's stop expecting them to walk away from the faith. Like, we're not going to be a church that expects them to walk away when they get to college. We're going to be a church who values discipleship, who values leadership development. So when they walk out of our church and they walk into another ministry, that minister calls and said, "What did you do with these kids?" I can plug them in immediately and they're ready to go. I want to be a church that does that. I want to be a church that's sending out pastors and missionaries across the city and across the world. I want to be honest. I've had a lot of conversations with other pastors in the area recently. There is a significant lack in young leadership. And so we need to be a church that is developing that next generation, and it requires all generations above them to allow them to be discipled, to step into discipleship, to develop them as leaders. Right? Remember what it was like being young. Every major revival or movement that's happened in the church has happened because 18 to about 35-year-olds get excited and passionate about something, and the older people are like, here's some information, and run away, right? I mean, you think about that, right? Partly because we lack the fear, maybe because we just have a little, or they have more energy. Right? Maybe because there's this passionate desire to do something significant in the world, and you have the time and you have the ability to just leave what you have and go do it. I mean, remember, think back to when you were 18 or 19 or 20. Right? I remember I could go literally play basketball for 4 hours, and I wasn't afraid of getting hurt. I wasn't afraid of not being able to walk the next day. I wasn't afraid of pulling something. I could go and do whatever I wanted at whatever speed I wanted to and not worry about what was going to happen the next day. Well, what if we mobilized our kids to actually serve God that way? What if we mobilized and sent out our kids to be passionate people who are going out to serve the community? I remember staying out till 3 in the morning and getting up the next day at 6 a.m. And you could do it because you were young. Right, remember putting it on a credit card, because I'm not concerned about tomorrow. Right? These things, while sometimes are not the wisest decision, have often led to significant changes in our world because people were willing to not be fearful and take a chance. We need to value that, maybe curb it a little bit, but we need to send out these next generation of kids to be what we want them to be. We often think back to some of those decisions that we made, and some of them, let's be honest, they weren't the wisest decisions we've ever made. But man, they led to a great adventure. Right? They led to a place that I wouldn't be willing to go to now simply because I'm just afraid or tired or I have too much that I'm keeping track of and holding on to. Let's let this young generation get excited about their faith, and let's push them to do great things. There was a young king in the Bible who found the scroll hidden away, and he reunited Israel with God's commandments. Martin Luther was 33 years old when he nailed the 95 Theses to the door and started the Protestant Reformation. Amy Carmichael was 22 years old when she left her home in Ireland and became a mother to countless amounts of orphans in India. What if we were a church that valued every generation so significantly that we discipled them, that we led them in leadership, we multiplied them, that a major movement in our world for God and his kingdom could happen again? It's not going to happen if we don't value generations. See, lastly, we sacrifice our attitudes and our opinions today for the building of tomorrow. It's pretty easy to call ourselves or to be a church that's committed to the next generation when we don't really think about what that means. It's easy to see the commitment of a church often by how they treat the next generation, right? A church can say they value and they can support a generation, and they can do a pretty decent job by providing really good programming and really good opportunities for them to have a safe environment to grow and understand the faith. But a church that's really committed to the next generation is going to allow that generation of whichever generation you are in to allow that generation and all generations in the church to develop the vision and the future of our church. You see, you and I are in a place where we can look at the world and see where we've been, but it's hard for us often to see where we're going. But you ask some of these teenagers where they see the world going, and they have a pretty good view. And so it would help us to value the input of our young kids, of our students, of our 18 and 20-year-olds. It would help us to value and be a generational church when we value their input and not just send them off to somewhere else. You see, it's often important that we're distracted by our kids. You know that, right? It's a reminder for us that it's bigger than us. It's bigger than our church. It's bigger than generation after generation after generation after generation, knowing, understanding, and believing the good things that God has done. You see, God's church is his response to the transformation that needs to happen in our world. And not just for the people that are existing in the world right now, but the people that will exist for 1,000 generations. And so we have to be a church that can uniquely stand in the culture and in the world right now, but also begin to set up things for generations and generations to come. It requires us to be gospel-centered in everything that we do. It requires us to be relationally disciple makers, where we're actually up close and we're having conversations with people about how God is transforming them, transforming their marriage, and transforming their workplace, and transforming their finances. It requires us to ask different questions. It requires us to get in close. It requires us to give up some of our time that we spend doing other things. It requires us to give up some of our finances and our talents, because God values the church, because that is his mission to the world. We are the church. This is not the church, but we are the church. This is where we gather. This is where we come to hear a message and to sing songs and to praise God, but we are the church, and so what we do as a church is important. And so here's my challenge for you. If you're part of this oldest generation in here, right? You may have retired, you might be close, you're probably grandparents. You've committed a significant amount to God's kingdom, to Bay Area, and to his church. You are valued. Hear me say that. We're not going to ignore the people that are in our church hoping for a future. We're going to value those that are here right now. And that means we value your leadership. We value your walk with Jesus. We value the conversations and the wisdom and all the things that you have to offer. Continue to serve and be faithful. Continue to lead. Look for opportunities where you can bring in others to leadership and discipleship. But also be patient with us. Be patient with some of the missteps we might take along the way. Be patient with passionate things that aren't really well thought through. Be patient with failures. Be encouraging. Be loving. Be caring. Continue to make disciples, develop leaders, multiply ministries. Continue to be a part and engage in what's going on every week, every day, every moment. Maybe you're in the generation below them. Maybe you have kids. Maybe you don't have kids, but you're in that generation that's kind of works 40 hours a week. 40 plus hours a week, right? You're taking care of your home. You're working, taking kids to practices. You're running around. You're doing all of these things. You're juggling home. You're juggling life. You're trying to do all the things. We value you as well. We value how you're engaging your kids in the discipleship and in the knowledge of understanding of God's gospel. And we value that you may not have all the time or the money because kids are expensive. But you offer something valuable to us too, and we want to come alongside you. And we want to provide opportunities and places for you to continue to grow in your faith so that you can continue to raise up tiny disciples who are going to be leaders in the church soon. And I stood up before 165 kids this week, and I said, I need you to take your faith seriously because my 8-year-old is watching you. Parents, you need to take your faith seriously because your 18-year-old or 15-year-old or 2-year-old is watching you. And we want to be a part of what you're doing. We value your ministry and your life, and we want to help you be a part of that. Get connected, serve, engage in what God is doing through the church. And bring your kids with you. Serve with them. Right? And even some of the grandparents, I missed that. Like, if you're a grandparent in here, you have the same responsibility to serve alongside your kids. Engage your grandkids in what's going on. Right? When their parents don't have time to bring them, you say, I'll take them. Jump in on their behalf. Bring your kids to church. The only way your kids are going to stay in church when they graduate from high school, I don't know if this is weird math, but the only way they're going to stay in church after they graduate from high school, if they attend church when they're in high school. I know that's kind of a crazy thought. because it's a value that we create when they're young, and it's a value they'll continue. Get them to serve in the church. That's one of the greatest ways you can see your kids continue to grow in their faith when they leave high school, is because they're going to get connected to a church, and they're immediately going to say, where can I serve? Because it's a value of who they are as a person. Go to church. Serve alongside them. Right? You're valued as well. And lastly, this youngest generation. You guys might be playing with Legos right now, or the little dot game. You might be eating some goldfish. Pause for a second and listen up. You are valued. You are valued just as much as every other person in this room. People think about you and think about what the church is going to look like for you. You know, I'm tired. I spent the weekend with kids. This is something that I am passionate about, that we are engaging and serving our kids. Continue to learn and take your faith seriously, because if you've served in any sort of kids ministry, you know that you can learn from them as well. That these kids don't just have something to offer us 20 years from now, they have something to offer us now. We're excited to develop areas of our church where we can see you take the reins here soon and run with it. Sing loud, sing passionately. Find places in your schools and in your communities to add value to them and share the gospel with them. Connect with the church. Be part of what's going on. Take your faith seriously. God has something significant for you. He has something significant for our church, but it requires us to value all generations equally. We will listen to you. We will put up with your crazy questions. In fact, keep asking crazy questions. Be curious. Become Bible nerds. Create ministries, lead organizations. Step into leadership in your schools, because there are people in your schools that need to hear the gospel. We are going to be a church that's generational. And it requires every single one of us to look at every other generation around us and value them the way that we value our own. Let's be a church that makes disciples. Let's be a church that develops leaders. Let's be a church that multiplies ministries and churches and pastors and church leaders, so that when people look back 100 years from now, they say, what was that church doing? Because they've impacted so many other areas through the work that they did. So we can be united. We can be gospel-centered. We can be mission-focused. We can be transformational. And it all happens through a church that's generational. I'm going to ask the band to come up, and we're going to pray, and we're going to teach you guys maybe a couple new songs that we've done over in kids ministry. And so the kids might be singing louder than normal. That's okay. They might be jumping around. That's good. But I want to encourage you, feed off of some of their energy. Enjoy it. Watch it. Remember what it was like to have that kind of energy. And remember, they're not doing it just because they're having fun. They're doing it because they love Jesus. Right? And loving Jesus is fun. And it brings us joy, and it brings us happiness. So I'm going to pray for us. We're going to sing together. We're going to take communion together. And what I love about that is when we take communion, we are not just taking communion as a church, but we are representing the church that existed for 2,000 years and all the people that have been taking communion, being united with Christ in his death and being raised to life through his resurrection. And so we take communion as a generational practice. So let's sing together. Let's pray together. Let me pray for you. God, we love that we are a church that is generational, that we value all generations, and we make decisions that will not just impact the people that are here now, but the generations that will come in the future. God, I pray that you would show us a clear vision of what that looks like. God, I pray that you would help us to see areas of our church where we need to develop leaders, where we need to make disciples, where we need to multiply ministries, and where we just set these kids free with passion and desire to love God and love the church and serve him. God, I want to see a revival happen in our church and in our community because we take this seriously. God, I pray you help us to live this out, value and service to your church. We just pray these things in your name. Amen.